In about 2 weeks, that'll put me at a quarter century of sobriety, which just blows my mind. I'm thrilled to be here. I really am. This is the first time I've spoken at an event of this scale. I think the most people that I've spoken in front of is about 100 people. And I kept waiting to get nervous, and people would ask me, I was like, are you nervous? Do you have butterflies yet? Of course, most people know that I'm an attention whore, so I wasn't going to have a problem with standing in front of a bunch of people and talking. That part I wasn't going to have much problem with. But, since the days I walked into this program, I wanted to be an old-timer. I very quickly figured out that in my first few months of the program, this guy one time said, he shared at a meeting, he said, make no mistake about it, my goal is to stay sober the rest of my life. He said, how I do that is one day at a time. And that really clicked for me because I've been hearing a lot about one day at a time. But, I've got my eye on the prize. And the prize for me is that I want to die sober. And that means more to me than just about anything else. And to be here in front of you and to honor all the ways that y'all have kept me sober over these years it's just hard to describe. Back in 2005, my mom had discovered lung cancer, and we went to Duke Hospital to do some scans, and she was very scared. And getting through that hospital on any day is a difficult task, and you're usually there all day. And we walk up, and there's this dour woman with these butterfly eyeglasses sitting back there typing, and she kind of looks up, and my mom gives her name. My mom's last name is Cooper. And she said, Miss Cooper, did you take your contrast? And my mom said, yeah. And to this day, I'm not really sure she was joking or not. She said, but I had to put some gin in it. And that, I really don't know whether that was joking or not, because she loved her some gin. And that woman kind of looked up over her glasses at my mama. And I thought, oh, shit, Mom, you have, done pissed off the church lady. Now we're going to be here all day. And she said, Miss Cooper, that'll ruin some gin. I adored my mom. I inherited a lot of good qualities from her. She knew how to drink. She knew how to work hard. She knew how to take life the way it came and try to make the best of it. And I worship the ground that she walked on. She was a driven woman, and I miss her terribly today. I remember one time as a teenager, we pulled up to the shopping mall. It was just she and I in the car. I was about maybe 14 years old, and this guy pulled into the space next to her, opened his door, and just kind of tapped the side of her car, not too hard. And he looked just long enough to realize that there was someone in the car next to him, and he quickly turned away, pretending like he didn't see it. And my mom proceeded, after the guy walked into the mall, to get out and key the side of his car. That's just the kind of woman she was. You did not want to piss her off. She was fiercely loyal. I was born in Atlanta, Georgia in 1962. What I remember about my childhood is that it was very tumultuous. My parents didn't get along very well, and there was a lot of arguing and a lot of yelling and a lot of discomfort. There was fortunately never any physical violence, and I'm very grateful for that. Hang on. Water. But I remember that just nothing was ever settled. Nothing ever felt right. It didn't feel calm. I wasn't sure, what life was supposed to feel like, but I knew that whatever I was experiencing was hard. And that same feeling that I hear everyone else sharing, not fitting in and not knowing how to be a part of life is something that I definitely related to. I learned very early that the way to compensate for this was to do well. I'm the classic overachieving star, firstborn child, and I quickly figured out that if I did what I was asked to do and supposed to do, that I got a lot of room to do what I wanted to do without much complaint from my parents. And it's that feeling of like the harder I work, then the more okay I'll be. And then later I learned that I could get away with a lot as well. And my first experience with a sort of mind-changing substance was paregoric. It's more or less liquid heroin. That's how I describe it. It tastes like ass, and I don't mean in a good way. It tastes bad. And I can remember, but I remember how it made me feel. And I remember I would be sick, like with a stomach ache and a fever of 103, and like really feeling horrible. And in the back of my mind would be this thought like, yeah, but I'm going to get some of that stuff. And that stuff is going to burn down here. And I'm not going to like the way it tastes. But boy, when it hits right here, everything's going to be okay. And I remember having those thoughts and feelings as a 4 or 5-year-old child. And so, I knew that I inherited this disease, and I was doomed from the start. And then there were drinking beers, and my parents were having parties and being, getting all the attention from that. By the time I got to the 70s, it was, that perfect mixture. I can say this in this crowd. I have to edit this out in other meetings. But, dick, drugs, and disco. And y'all forgive me for my potty mouth. I hope this isn't inappropriate. I've never done this before. So, I've spoken before, but never to a crowd quite like this. So I know what y'all are thinking. And all of that stuff just kind of happened all at once. And all of a sudden, I wasn't this lost little kid, and all of a sudden I was desirable, and all of a sudden I was discovering a community of people outside of my family that they didn't like, and I was sneaking into bars, and all of that, and I was discovering sex, and all of that happened at one time, and that's a very powerful combination. And that started. I remember the first time I took alcohol was a bottle of Passport Scotch, and I told myself that I was going to drink Scotch the first time I got drunk because I had a sense that Scotch drinkers were sophisticated. What I didn't know is it sort of tasted like paregoric. Again, it's one of those things. I did not like the taste of that stuff, but it fit what I thought. Someone who was going to drink is supposed to drink, and why. And I consumed about half that bottle and got really loaded. And that same feeling, that feeling of all of a sudden, all the things that were wrong in the world, just from sort of the inside out, everything's at peace. This same guy who told me that story about staying sober the rest of his life used to also say that that the recovery does the same thing that alcohol and drugs used to do for us. It just takes longer. It's not quite so instant. But make no bones about it, we come here because we get something that we desperately need, which is to feel like we're okay, and that we can live and not have to drink and take drugs. I started college in architecture school in Houston, and I was definitely a child of the sexual revolution. I was experimenting with everything. It never really bothered me. All my friends knew it. I was kind of known as the crazy wild guy, but again, I was always delivering the grades and doing all the things that I was supposed to do. I went to New York for an internship between my 4th and 5th year of college and did a lot of fun things up there that I'm glad I got to do once, and came back, and it was the 5th year of my 5th year of college, and I went from, and by this time I'd also discovered cocaine and crystal meth and all kinds of other things that I really enjoyed doing and would use them oftentimes as a part of school. That lie that these things help us be more productive and smarter and get more done, and they feed into that achievement, that overachiever personality. It's one of the reasons these drugs are so dangerous for many of us. And so I had started selling cocaine to my classmates, and I started selling pot back in high school. And so the first semester of my fifth year, I got nothing less than a B on my transcript. And by March of the second semester, 3 months later, I had dropped out of every course but one and was failing it, and that was painting. I couldn't even show up to painting class. That's pretty bad when a gay man is failing painting. And no one knew. None of my family knew that I wasn't going to graduate college in 2 months. And I'd had 2 episodes where, while my parents were out of town for a weekend, that I had gotten so high that I was laying on the floor of my bedroom, and I felt like my heart was going to literally explode and come out of my chest. And I knew, and I sat there thinking, my parents are going to come home and they're going to find me dead in my bedroom, and they're going to have no clue, no idea what's going on. And I had, long story short, I reached out to a counselor and who suggested that I go into treatment. I thought that was a bit rash. That classic, I'll be fine. And I thought they were overreacting. And I went and toured this treatment facility that was near where I lived. And what I figured out was that, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I can go into treatment, get a note from the doctor, and withdraw gracefully from all these classes that I've messed up for this semester. And that was basically my motivation for willing to go into treatment, was because it could sort of clean up the mess and keep the outside looking really pretty. And so that's what I did. And I went in, and I remember the day that my mom dropped me off at the treatment facility, and we got checked in, and we go to the unit, and then she turns around and she's getting ready to leave the unit that I can't leave, that I'm locked in, and she started crying. And it was a number of years before I realized that the last time that had happened was when she dropped me off at kindergarten and was, dropping her kid off for the first time. And that's what I feel like I had been reduced to at that point. I'm very grateful. I was talking today in the CMA relapse prevention meeting that, some of us relapse before we come into the program, and some of us relapse after we come in the program. But no one walks through that door and sits in that chair that you're sitting in right now, not having tried to quit and found out that they couldn't. So next time you're thinking that maybe your program isn't as good as someone else's because you've had a relapse, or that you think your program's better than someone else's because you haven't, just remember that. The disease hits us all the same. And I took to the program right away. I really don't know why some people make it and some people don't. The closest I can come to answering that question for me is that 2 things. One, the people convinced me that what I had was a disease that was going to kill me. And I believed them. That I had gotten too close already to that, to think that they were lying. I knew they were telling me the truth when they told me that this disease was going to kill me. And when it was just me sitting alone in, the bed of this hospital by myself, when no one was watching the show or anything like that, and I just simply asked myself the question, do I want to live or do I want to die? The question was, I wanted to live. There was no question about that in my mind. I enjoy life too much, and I'm not ready to go. And those 2 things, I think, are what, certainly kept me coming back for a long time. My counselor assigned me to a sponsor who was who he sponsored, who went to the Lambda Center group in Houston, Texas. Yep, that's where I got sober and started taking me to meetings. And that sponsor and I started working the steps. I moved into a halfway house after I got out of treatment because that's what they recommended that I do. And I remember going to. In July of 1987, I went to get an HIV test, and I was not surprised with the results. They came back positive because I knew what I had been doing, and I knew by that time how you got this, and we didn't know a lot. We certainly didn't know as much as we do today, but I knew what to do and what not to do. And so I wasn't surprised with the results. And it's weird to tell this story because I think I was maybe 20 years sober before I remembered this event, I think, in the right light. And sitting in that nurse's office getting these results back in 1987, and many of you here remember what that kind of news was like back then. It was not the news that it is today. And this thought came into my mind. It's like, all right, Scott, here's what you're going to do. You're not going to ignore this. You're going to take care of yourself. But you're going to act as if you have every expectation of a normal lifespan. You're not going to go out and run up a bunch of debt on credit cards because sure as you do that, they're going to cure this thing, right? And you're going to have to pay that shit back the rest of your life. And I heard some stories today of some people that had to do that, And 20 years later, it finally dawned on me that I was not capable of that kind of thought. That kind of judgment and understanding was not possible in a brain of a mid-20-year-old cokehead, crackhead, alcoholic. That was just not possible. That was a higher power coming in and planting an idea in my head that was going to save my life in a way where I didn't even know how it got there. Because I had a real chip on my shoulder about God, and I was a vehement secularist. And if God had come down and said, Scott, here's what you're going to do, I'd have run. And so for 20 years, I pretended like that was my idea, and today I know different. My God has got to be big enough where she can give me ideas and give me help and not have me even know that it's coming from him or her. My higher power has to be big enough for me where there's no chance that I can get my mind wrapped all the way around who it is, because this disease is so powerful. If we don't have a God that's much, much bigger than any of us, we're not going to survive. I immediately got into a relationship, which was not advised, and with a psychopath. I wish that were a joke. I really do. Yeah, I wish that were a joke. This man and I had known each other for a couple of years before I got sober, and he was a very, very sick man, and I was a very, very sick man as well. And I needed a safe harbor, and he needed a project, and we were made for each other. He was always very supportive of my program, as long as at the end of the day that I was more reliant upon him than I was upon the program. And so whenever I would start growing and changing, as we will do eventually if we stay in here and we don't drink and we make some even half-assed attempt to work the steps, when I started getting better, he started getting nervous. And at year 1 and 4 and 7 of this relationship, I tried to get out of it. Now, this guy was involved in the occult and did a lot of things that I didn't understand. And there was never any physical abuse, but every time that I would try to break up with him, this is one of those people who are really insane and very, very sick, but very, very smart. And so when you meet him, you don't know that this is what kind of person that he is. And he knew how to manipulate, and he knew how to bring fear into me, and he knew how to keep me scared at a foundation level of him. And it's hard to describe this up here because, and I'm not going to go into the details, but the bottom line was that every time I tried to get out of this relationship, I ended up feeling like my life was threatened, quite literally. And very weird things would happen that I couldn't explain. And I never knew whether those things were coming from him or these people that he was involved with. And I was terrified. And I'd end up running back into the relationship. I know how a battered spouse feels now because somewhere around year 5 in this relationship, I started to see through the insanity. And And I started just having a sense of what was really going on here, and that maybe I was not really seeing the truth. And facing that and admitting that I had let that kind of bullshit go on for 5 years was so impossible for me to accept, and brought up so much shame that I ended up just sweeping it right under the rug. We're not always prepared to see the truth, and I was not. And I could not admit that I had let something like this happen to me. And so it wasn't until I was 10 years sober that I was actually finally able to get out of this relationship. At about 7 or 8 years sober, I kind of hit a wall, and I had moved to North Carolina from Houston. It was sort of a geographic. It was more of my partner's geographic than mine. And I was going to meetings, and I was doing all the right things, but, I had a growing list of secrets. Oh, and the other thing is that my first sponsor had taken me through like 4 or 5, and we started kind of into 6, and then 7 kind of fell off, and that was it. And we lost our momentum. And then when I had a year and a half sober, he got drunk, and then I spent like the next 5 years looking for that perfect sponsor, which is one reason why today in my home group, and my friends will attest to this, boy, if you come in and we hear even one whiff that you do not have a sponsor, before you leave that meeting, you will. And we will assign them to you. And this stuff kills people every day. We don't have time. And you can decide later that that's not the right one, but we're going to grab you by the hand, and we're going to throw you in the back of the car, and we're going to take you with us, and we're going to show you how this is done. And so I'd not been taken all the way through the steps. I'd gotten as far as I was in the fellowship, on fellowship. And so I grabbed this. I had gotten to the point where I was either going to blow my brains out or I was going to start using again. I knew that those were the two choices I was facing. And I called this friend of mine that I trusted, that I had met in North Carolina, and I went to this park, Forest Hills Park, near downtown Durham, and we sat, and I just emptied everything, all the things that it was like an unplanned 5th step, where all the fears and all the secrets and all the things that I'd been holding in that I didn't understand and I didn't know what to do with, and this crazy relationship that I was in that I couldn't figure out. And he said, boy, you need a new home group. You're going to have to, and he introduced me to the Durham Central Group, which was the oldest group in Durham. It's been in existence about 65 years now. And I went, and I was still in that mode of trying to figure out, who my sponsor is going to be and how to find that perfect sponsor. And finally, this one guy said, why don't I help you find one? And he did, and he introduced me to Jesse S., who is this, he was in his 60s, white guy, Republican, used to be a preacher, not my idea of a perfect sponsor. And we went and had lunch and sat down, and I said, there's a couple things you need to know about me. I'm HIV positive, and I don't believe in God. And he said, well, do you want to stay sober? And I said, yeah. He said, well, then I'll work with you. He said, if you're willing to do what it takes, I don't really care about all that other stuff. And so we started working the steps, and I told him, I said, I want someone to take me 1 through 12 by the book, as it's written in the book. I don't want to stop till we're done, and I want to forget everything I think I know about this program. I don't want to be like a newcomer again. And he did. And as a result of that, I have a higher power today that knows my name, that knows who I am, and that I can rely on and lean on, and that keeps me sober. The first step, for me is the powerlessness was easy to accept and admit. The thing that still dogs me, the theme of long-term sobriety, I think, is unmanageability. It's that second half of the first step that I think I tend to forget. And and that can dog me today, even with as much time under my belt. I don't deal with the obsession to drink and drug anymore, thankfully. But unmanageability definitely comes into play. The second step for me was difficult because I thought what it said I had to do was figure out who God was. And that's not what it says. And, you know what it says. It says, came to believe that a power greater than myself could restore me to sanity. And all I needed to do was have a sense that it was possible. It was possible that there was something out there that I wasn't it and that it was big enough to handle my disease. And once I stopped trying to define God, I started moving forward. The third step, there's that part of the big book where it's talking about the actor and the stage, and if everyone would just stay put, and is he not a victim of the delusion that he can wrest satisfaction and happiness out of this life if only he manages well? This is like, that moment when I read that was like, it's like someone had, it's like I discovered I had a twin, and I finally understood like what was wrong with me and missing. There was just some fundamental stuff about myself that when I read that sentence, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that I was in the right place. I did a 4-step and a 5th step with him, I just recently completed a 4th and 5th step, my fourth and 5th step with my current sponsor. I'll come and talk about that in a little bit. We ended up going all the way through the steps, and as a result of these steps, I had a spiritual awakening, and then all kinds of weird things started happening. So, having this huge chip on my shoulder about God. Now, you can take the boy out of the South, but you cannot take the South out of the boy. So I started having these very irrational desires to go to church, which did not make any sense to me whatsoever. And I was wrestling with that. I was like, why am I being drawn to this? It's like there's all kinds of things about the Christian church that I do not like to this day, that I still don't like them. The idea that the only way to get to God is through Jesus. And I was like, I don't believe that. I already have a connection with the higher power. I don't need to go through anybody else in order to get there. Obviously, there's the gay stuff. And I was like, why would I want to go hang out with a bunch of people that, don't like me because I'm gay? I'm pretty sure that God wired me this way for a reason. And so I talked to this Episcopal rector who used to come around the rooms, and he'd get about 30 days, and that was about it. That's about all he could get. But I told him, I said, what I was struggling with, and he was like, well, Scott, why do you come to AA? And I said, well, to learn how to drink, learn how not to drink one day at a time. And he said, why don't you go just follow this thing that you're being led to do and go to church? And not because you know the answers or because you think you know who these people are or what they believe, but because you don't, and because you want to find out why you're being led down this path. And so I did. And then the next thing you know, I'm singing in the damn choir. So we'll come back and talk about that in a second, too. I finally got out of that relationship. And the reason I was able to get out of that relationship was because I had a higher power. And I remember this one friend of mine, Dwayne B., who was sitting with me in a car one night, and I had told him the story about this crazy man that I'd been in this relationship with 10 years and how frightened I was and how desperate I was to get out of it. And he said, Scott, man, you have got to believe that God's bigger than this man, that God is more powerful than what this man or his cult or any of these people, can do to you. And that was the first time, I had a vision of something I could grab a hold on that was going to pull me through and get me out of that relationship. And about 2 weeks later, we sat down one night and talked, and I said, if I have to stay in this relationship with you the rest of my life, because if I don't, some cult is going to, take us both out, and all these bad things are going to happen to me that you've been telling me for the last 10 years, fine, I'll stay. But I'm not going to stay in this relationship pretending that I love you, because I don't. And that's over. And that was it. It was done. He knew that he didn't have any more power over me. I had recovered through the program enough to the point that this evil man had no more sway over me. And and within 2 weeks he was gone. Thank God. About a year and a half later, I'd been dating and having a good time, and I met my current partner, and I walked in the room, and he's about this tall. His name is Nugget. Y'all see him around this weekend. And I was smitten, and I took him out on the first date, and I had been on a few dates at this point, and I kind of learned how to get some essential information out early in the process. And so we're sitting there having dinner, and I said, listen, there's 3 things you need to know about me. I'm a recovering alcoholic, I'm HIV positive, and I'm a Christian. And sorry. So brother did not miss a beat, kept eating his dinner, no problems whatsoever. Later, I hear the story from him that he ran home and called his dad and said, Dad, man, listen to this. I went on a date with this guy. I really like him, but, da-da-da-da-da-da. And his dad said, well, son, you got to watch out for those Christians. He's right. He's right. So if all the crazy relationships I had over the years were what it took to have the one that I have today with David, they were worth it. And we've been together now almost 15 years. And he loves hanging out with his drunks and tweakers, let me tell you. So about 4 months after that story I told you at Duke Hospital with my mom, my mom had been sent to a nursing home, and fortunately she was only there for 2 nights, and I got a call from the nursing home saying that they were taking her to Duke Hospital. And she was 70 years old, and 2 nights earlier, before she was checked out of the hospital and sent to this nursing home, we'd had a conversation about what she wanted, and talking about the DNR, the do not resuscitate. And my mom had, as a result of the surgery that she ended up having, she ended up throwing a stroke and lost a lot of her speech and comprehension ability. Unfortunately, she'd been pretty healthy most of her life, and her demise only lasted about 4 months. But communicating with her was a challenge. But that was one night when it just came through really clear to me. And I asked her, I said, if something happens, Mom, what do you want them to do? And she was like, let me go, let me go, let me go. She just kept saying that over and over again. And so I'm at Duke Hospital, and I actually got there before the ambulance did. And they wheel her in, and she's already unconscious at this point. And they bring her into the ER, and they're ripping open these really, really evil-looking packages of long plastic tubes, and they're taking her gown off, and they're yelling things at me. And at the top of my lungs, I had to scream at them to stop, that she had a DNR, and the whole room just stopped and looked at me. And then the doctor said, check the record, and because they were getting ready, to do all this bad stuff that she didn't want done. And that was the hardest thing I ever had to do, was to stand up for her at the end there, and to be with her and to let her go the way that she wanted to go. And I'm so grateful that she was able to tell me what she wanted, and I was able to be there. And that's definitely a gift of this program as well. I remember a few weeks after that being in my home group talking about just how much I hurt inside with her being gone, and how good it felt, how honorable it felt to miss her, how real that was, and to not be trying to run from it. And I know that y'all understand this in a way that no one else does, the way it is to feel loss and pain, and to feel like I'm here and I can be with this and I can do this, and to know that it's right. I'm so grateful for that. My sponsor gave me an assignment recently of writing a letter to my mom, because I was having these dreams where it's like, where is she? How come she hadn't called me? Because, we were buddies, man. She moved to Durham, and she knew all my friends, and she went out to dinner with us, and she was a very important part of my life. And my sponsor said, well, what would you say to her if she called you? And so I wrote a letter, and I told her, what had been going on for the last 7 years, and it was hard. But I have this vision now of like the person who kind of goes to the gravesite, and sits there and talks to their loved one who's gone, and it's like this kind of conversation. And I realize I can kind of keep having a conversation with her, and that's another gift of this program, is that we can make our amends, and there's all these clever ways of dealing with people who are gone, where we can have meaningful relationships with them that last longer than they did. And it's like now she's in my heart, it's not so much pain anymore. It's like she's still there, and I can talk to her, and I can tell her what's going on, and I can be mad at her. I can be mad at her in ways I couldn't be mad at her when she was around, because she would, knock the hell out of me. But I'm just so grateful for that. Before I wrap up, I just want to talk about what's been going on with me lately. So I think there's three really important things. One is we started a CMA meeting in Durham, North Carolina. Myself, David H., and Brad R. And I got to rediscover the drug part of my story. And because I had figured out early on that, back in the 80s, you went to AA to deal with this stuff because there wasn't other programs for this. And I am so grateful to have become a member of that fellowship and to get in touch with that part of my story. I struggled for a while where I would hear stories about how my friends used crystal meth, and I didn't use it the same way. I never put a needle in my arm, and I was happy to be at these meetings, but I kind of felt like I was on the outside looking in. And you know how the disease talks to us in our brains, and it tells us we don't belong, and it can find all kinds of ways to do that. And David, who I sponsor, was picking up on this. And one night I had a dream where I had given myself some medicine that way, and it didn't freak me out. And it blew my mind. I was calling him, wigging out. It's like, I had this dream, and because I've always been afraid of needles. And he sat me down in the car one night when he dropped me off, and he was like, listen, he says, I know you don't think that you have used the same way that we have, and that means that you're out here, and that you don't belong. But I assure you that if you went back out today, that's exactly what you would do. And so make no bones about it that you are a tweaker and that you do belong in this program. And he's right. He's right. I know that if I went back out today, what kind of mayhem would be out there. And so what I like to say today is I'm a low-bottom cokehead and alcoholic, and I'm a high-bottom tweaker. And I'm all right with that. The big book's got 1/3 of those personal stories are for people who think maybe they haven't quite lost enough, to get this program. So I know that there's a place for me in this fellowship, and I'm really glad to be here. And, and who knew 2 weeks ago I'm now, doing service at a national level for the fellowship, which I'm still blown away by the opportunity that's gonna create. So the second thing is that we discovered these newcomers back at the Atlanta Roundup back in September. They came out of the woodworks. My AA home group, the CMA group hadn't really gotten ahead of steam yet, and my AA home group was a lot of old-time sobriety, but, we tended to scare the newcomers away because it was just like, I think we just looked like we had our shit together too much or something. I don't know. And, well, probably it was because I was, like, assigning them to sponsors and throwing them in the back of my car. I think we just scared them. But all of a sudden, we, got a gaggle of them to come down to Atlanta, and they were within their first 6 months of sobriety, and we just grabbed them by the hand and took them around, and they're crying, and they haven't been in front of that many people before, and all those emotions they're throwing out for the first time, and it was just mayhem, and this amazing thing happened in the middle of that roundup, and I'm so grateful to my Atlanta peeps for this. I went with this sort of classic idea of like, I'm the old timer and I'm going to help the newcomer, and isn't it awesome? I'm going to help the newcomer, and that's what we do because we give it back. We pass it on to them, and halfway through the weekend, I realized I needed these people. I needed these people not because I needed to help them stay sober. I needed these people so that I stay sober. And I felt that desperation that I had when I first came into the program. And I clung to these boys and said, I have to stick with these guys because I need this in order to not take a drink today. And that is a very bizarre feeling to have when you're 20-some-odd years sober. But I'm so grateful for it because it has just completely changed the face of my program today. The third thing that I want to talk about that's going on today is I have not had an honest relationship with money or time my entire life. And sometime in February or January, I was reading a note from the IRS, and I've gotten these for years and years, ever since I've earned a living. And, figuring out how I'm going to pay them off, and I can put this into a payment plan, and, and all this stuff. And this is not easy to sit up here and talk about, but I remember just opening up this notice that I knew I was going to get, and I knew I was going to have to deal with, and I was sitting there trying to tell myself that this was okay. Like, I was expecting this, and this is just what I do. And something finally clicked, and I turned to my partner, and I said, I'm powerless over money. And definitely took him by surprise. Now, this is something he's known about for 14 years. And that man suffers a lot of bad habits out of this alcoholic, let me tell you. But I know that this is the one issue that if I don't solve, I'm going to lose that relationship. And I finally just had enough. And this is the second half of that first step. This is unmanageability. This is the lie that I've got to figure this problem of mine out instead of turning it over to my higher power and working the steps on it. So I called my sponsor. We got together. We talked about it, and I started my fourth and fifth step on this issue. And then I very quickly realized that this wasn't going to be just about finances. I'm not about to do the list, the columns and the rows, and not, do the whole bloody thing. So I did a complete inventory of my resentments, my fears, and my sexual behavior in my relationships. And it's the most thorough fourth and fifth step I've ever done. And I'm on 8 now. And I don't know how I'm going to solve all these problems yet, but I remember telling my sponsor one night when we were doing my fifth step, I was telling her about this relationship with the evil guy, the psychopath, and I just kind of resolved that I was always going to have some residual fear that, one day these weird people were going to come out of the woodwork and, take me out or something, like in some mafia movie. And I said, I just kind of have accepted that I'm just always going to feel this way about this. And she said, well, if it's up to you, you will. But if you turn it over to your higher power, anything is possible. And she said, you can rely on the steps. You can depend on the steps to change your life. And she's right. So that's what I'm doing right now. And I want to close with, talking about this whole journey of going from being like angry, anti-religious to church choir to, and the good news, I've come to understand that for me, the surest sign of spiritual health is if my ideas about a higher power continue to evolve. I don't think spirituality is meant to be static. I think it's a very naive and childish notion that we're going to figure out what God is and then check. Move on. I don't want that. I want there to always be mystery and discovery and evolution in my spiritual program. And I've figured out how to embrace change as a result of this, to really welcome it. I like to call it evolution because it sounds more fancy and it has more syllables than change. But that's really what it is. But my favorite story in the big book is in the 4th edition. The story is in the second section of stories, and it's called Flooded with Feeling. One of the interesting things about the story is that there's nothing in the story that gives you an indication as to whether this is a man or a woman telling this story that I've been able to find. And she talks about having the white light spiritual awakening that we read about in the old timers in the front part of the book that gives many of us heartache. But for her, that didn't lead to like any kind of certainty about what God was or wasn't. It just got her to the program. It told her that she belonged here. And it says more than 11 years later, it's hard to recapture the feelings of that night. Talking about her white light experience. What do I believe as a result? I can say that doubting God's existence was no barrier at all to a spiritual experience. Also, I can say that having such an experience didn't lead me to any certainty about God. Alcoholics Anonymous gives me the freedom to believe and to doubt as much as I need to. I want to thank y'all for keeping me sober today. Good night.